The Lawyer's Tale as told to Stephen Collis. Chaucer's The Man of Law's Tale is a narrative of sea migrations, of exile and refuge, and exile yet again. Sea journeys are signs of rejection, betrayal, treachery, homelessness. Constance, our heroine, is driven by forces she has little control over, across the Mediterranean, out into the Atlantic, and back again. Systems of state and patriarchal power enclose, then reject her. Her freedom is fleeting, false. A ship in which they hand her sit and bid her learn sail, or in which she arrives at a strange nation where she may yet again be bound under subjection. Giorgio Agamben. It is almost as if, starting from a certain point, every decisive political event were double-sided. The spaces, the liberties, and the rights won by individuals in their conflicts with central powers always simultaneously prepares a tacit but increasing inscription of individuals' lives within the state order, thus offering a new and more dreadful foundation for the very sovereign power from which they wanted to liberate themselves. Chaucer's Man of Law tells us precious little about the law or himself. The general prologue only notes his desire for property. All was fey simple to him. It's not clear what Constance's story means to him, either personally or professionally. The man of law remains terra nullius, a spurious empty zone to claim, desire stretching its hands out towards unclaimed lands of claimants from their own landstone. The lawyer, looking out to sea, croons April in cruelest soliloquy. Ship that fleeteth in the great sea, to make submissions in courts of pain and woe. Knowing the truth, one does not always remain intact, nor does the truth always remain intact, and the borders are no longer at the border, but move as magnets amongst iron-filing statutes. Because of a complicated relation to borders, we are trying to figure out boundaries of our present age. I don't particularly like the term Anthropocene. Isn't anthros what we are trying to navigate away from? Call it geophysical capitalism, the era in which our economic activities have come to affect the entire geosphere, all ecosystems, all species. If we blame everyone, we blame no one. We give the guilty free passage. And we bear burdens we did not bring on ourselves. Some have said it's the Industrial Revolution. Some have said the deepening dependence upon fossil fuels coeval with the Industrial Revolution. Still others have said it's the bomb, the atomic marker registered in isotopes the world over. But the first time human activity impacted the entire planet, changing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere in the course of a single century, was during North American colonization, when the deaths of some 50 million indigenous inhabitants of Turtle Island was registered in a worldwide decline in CO2, swallowed up by the forests that filled in the farmlands the indigenous worked before they were suddenly swallowed up. In the Mediterranean, fishermen sometimes pull up skulls and bones in their nets. It is estimated there could be 50 million climate refugees by the year 2020, displaced by disasters, including droughts, desertification, and floods. No matter how colonial the calculus, 50 million for 50 million is no book's balance, no ledger's line item. We were in motion, complicating the empty category we, moving north. Sand and sea swept, in a ship all steerless, the carapace of a beetle blue, blue-black, midnight blue, blue of not and never, carried for thousands of miles in fragile hands to seek and strange thrones and leave life's evidence there. The lawyer notes, his village had been razed to the ground. He'd never been far from his home until he wound up in London. Refused asylum because they didn't believe that he was from the tribe he said he was from, or that his brother could be his brother. In 1816, the restored French monarchy sent a small fleet of ships led by the frigate Medusa to retake possession of the French establishments on the African coast. Captained by the incompetent but loyally royalist Hughes Dury de Chamarais, on July the 2nd, the Medusa runs aground on the notorious Alguin Bank, off the coast of Senegal. 147 colonists and crew are set adrift in a hastily constructed raft from which a mere 15 barely living survivors are rescued 2 weeks later. Madness, infighting, cannibalism, starvation, the sacrifice of the weak, and the stormy sea took the rest. Jump ahead 2 centuries. On April 18, 2015, a massively overloaded fishing boat carrying possibly as many as 900 migrants capsizes and sinks in the Mediterranean some 60 nautical miles off the coast of Libya while making its way north to Italy. Only 28 survivors are pulled from the sea. Hundreds of African migrants, we learn, were locked in the submerged hold. Border controls are most severely deployed by those Western regimes that create mass displacement, and are most severely deployed against those whose very recourse to migration results from the ravages of capital and military occupations, harsha waliya, and doing border imperialism. I am between hell and the deep blue sea. We were in motion, emptying the category we, moving south, serenading sinecures in handmade hopes, and crashing blows, an empty box that might be filled with spice, an empty ship that might more lightly go if sweet and light it could more crudely show the underside of the undercommons locked deep in the hold of the ship slipping below. In some historical situations, a fire, say, is set in a building where some quarry, let's call them, has holed up. And when the quarry comes running out of the burning building they have sought, let's call it refuge in, they are shot dead by those lying in wait who have themselves set the fire in the first place. Those who set the fire, let's call them hunters, claim the setting of the fire and the shooting of the quarry are 2 separate and unrelated events. They claim the quarry whom they accuse were somewhere they should not have been, came running at them, and that they were therefore forced, is how they put it, to shoot them in self-defense, as they call it. But the quarry know the direct and systemic connections between the setting of the fire and their being shot upon seeking to escape the fire. Indeed, their becoming quarry, and taking refuge in the building in the first place was the result of hunters hunting. They know it's the hunter's game, and that in this and many similar historic situations they have so often been named quarry, and that justice is a world without hunters and without quarry, a world where fires are not lit and shots are not fired, and the world is its own refuge. Seas blue, leaps out a bird, leaps out a hand, skyward to jets toward ships from the shore. The lawyer briefed and briefly docks the deep dislocation in the Sahel. As rainfall patterns, floods and droughts disrupt the climatic fact that the world was born yearning to be a home for all. While the Medusa was not charged with the task of re-engaging in the slave trade, that was nevertheless the end result of the re-establishment of the French colony at St. Louis in Senegal. As the new governor conveniently turned the proverbial blind eye, by the end of June 1818, a French patrol route had been set up in an attempt to intercept and arrest slavers. But perversely, the inconvenience of eluding capture made the trade more difficult and therefore even more profitable for those who escaped the authorities. 2015. The latch locks on the darkened hold as fighter jets scramble to fishing ports. Immigration restrictions and the crackdown on smugglers are part of what turned the migrant crisis into a humanitarian disaster. Instead of deterring migrants, these laws make smuggling operations more profitable, more professional, and far more brutal. Alexander Coryat, survivor of the raft of the Medusa and author of The Shipwreck of the Frigate the Medusa. Readers who shudder at the cry of outraged humanity recollect at least that it was other men, fellow countrymen, and comrades who had placed us in this abominable situation. Declarations of rights, whose subtle inscription of natural life is the ordinary figure in this juridical order, exception made law and life made bare. It's Zoe told me this as we careened through a dull day. You can build an office in your home, but you can't build a home in your office. I write to the lawyer. I stare at the reproduction of Jericho's painting on the cover of Jonathan Miles's The Wreck of the Medusa. Its greeny tones deepening in time. A mirror that turns you to stone. The energy feeding the lamp I read by. Can you really tell which bodies are white and which are black on the dust jacket reproduction? I scan online pictures of blue boats bobbing in the Mediterranean. A diver dragging a blue jean-clad boy up through clear water. Dark hands hanging loose at its side. I walk on the beach near my home, looking at ships and water-bound borders. My ancestors came to the New World as a new climate comes to a region that is soon warming. Coal miners, we were ourselves largely carbon, affecting other carbon through the release of still more carbon. We, things that are living, are all carbon-based beings, but we, active and passive participants in waves of economic violence, don't all do unto others as we would accumulate various and unequal wealths and debts to ourselves. I say this not to avoid race, but as a white man standing near the destruction, possibly for a photograph, possibly to observe or direct. Only occasionally am I capable of being caught in the crossfire. Maybe I say the wrong thing at the wrong time, in the wrong place. Then I might be arrested and later released, or sued, and the suit subsequently dropped, to get my whiteness out of the way for a moment, so the structural destruction of non-white bodies may continue apace, producing wealth. I, as white, may at least warm myself near. I speak in prose, let him rhymes make. Under immigration powers, held prior to deportation, on hunger strike, until we could prove that he was who he said he was, from people who could speak his language, who could confirm that he'd been met in the village before. This was the commune voice of every man. He lived a cold winter, sleeping in a phone box, ate food from the floor the street market left at the end of the day. He always asked me about my family, even though he knew that his was gone. The law has this lingering human shape that from its metal workings must be scraped. April 24, 2015. Senegalese writer Fatou Diome on French television. An old white man on either side of her and her gallant white male host trying throughout to interrupt her. You see on the headlines the flow of Asian migrants arriving in Europe, but you don't speak of the Europeans going to Africa. That's the free flow of the powerful, the ones who have the money and the right kind of passports. You go to Senegal, to Mali, to any country around the world. Anywhere I go, I meet French people, Germans and Dutch. I see them everywhere around the world because they have the right passport. With your passports, you go anywhere around the world and act like you run those places with your pretentious demeanor. Stop the hypocrisy. We will all be rich together or perish together. 8:30 a.m. Current distance between myself and sea in the other room, 7 meters. 8:31 a.m. Current distance between Darfur and London, 4,850 kilometers. The earth's crust tilting under shift of waters and ice melt over mantle, pressing earthquake to drought lips. This kiss for refuge, a greeting or a goodbye. The law sits a hooded falcon on whose arm privilege preys. To be granted asylum, you need a well-founded fear of persecution. In many parts of the world, for many people, this is simply called every day. Is there an internal flight alternative that gets you outside of binaristic narratives? Largely against her will, the man of law's Constance would have traveled some 15,000 kilometers by sea, from Rome to Syria to Northumbria and back to Rome. Syrians formed the largest group of migrants attempting to cross the Mediterranean Sea in 2014. They make their way south into Africa before turning north again to Libya. A recent report claims that the US was running arms to the Syrian rebels through Benghazi. These are switches, channels made network destruction that are traced across this Google Earth. What if complicity is a form of relationship, of negative connection? The realization that we are all in or near the same drunken boat. It's just that some of us own the boat, some of us built the boat, some of us work on the boat, some of us have boarded the boat by choice, some because we felt we had no choice, others who were given no choice at all. Still others haven't even heard about the boat, or they watch it idly, crowded and listing on TV as waters are roughed by hovering helicopter blades. Complicity, like privilege then, is when we find our relationship to the boat and find we were not exactly forced, that we can yet choose otherwise, gather at the stern, organize the disembarkation into unkempt regions of permanent asylum. Only from the negative impulse, from the labyrinth of the no, can the writing of the future appear. Enrique Villamatas. Asylum seeker, oft have you to rely on oral evidence as to what wild waves while you drive, or what awaits in the place ye shall arrive. The lawyer coughs. Beneath its hood, the law startles, bells on tangles jangling. Accounts can sometimes vary, and this is seen as inconsistent. There can be different accounts from different members of a family, and this can be seen as inconsistent. If the information is inconsistent, it can't be true. Then there is turbulence somewhere between the jail and the endless sea. 1819. The painter Theodore Géricault begins work on his masterpiece, The Raft of the Medusa. In a studio in suburban Paris, Géricault, who from the outset craved facts about the catastrophe and assembled a file full of related documents, painting several limbs, hands and heads in his noxious studio, a tangle of limbs that recalls the human debris strewn about the raft. The painter spent days in charnel houses studying decay. We can attribute to these paintings and drawings of severed limbs the role of stimuli in his living with the raft. I will set myself adrift on a difficult sea, Géricault proclaimed. The painting was a requiem for Republican French values then as now. 1820, the painting is shown by William Bullock at the Egyptian Hall in Piccadilly, London. Géricault himself caving into disease, wasting away. He was so thin that he had taken on the haunting look of a raft survivor. October 24, 1848, in the Louvre, a mason's ladder punctured the raft of the Medusa, damaging some sky and the side of the hand of the sailor waving for rescue, the controversially placed black signaler at the apex of their hope. What we see in the distance is not a rescue vessel. It's nothing but a part of the same state machinery that is responsible for our present plight. Dear accomplice, my anomic drive is lodged in the very heart of the nomos. Sing out from the stays and spars of fraught voyage. We shall not drenchen in the deep. We will be as merchants. We will prune and tame gardens. No flowers will field as oysters. The times will be incipient. A chorus of groans will mark all our small tragedies. No one will see the eyes we do not possess. We will not repatriate value. Value will be the heat in our hands as we reach out to another and pull them onto the shore of this strange nation that is no nation at all. 2015. One smuggler was a former oil rig technician. For the short term at least, international companies have good reason to hunker down in Libya. The country's crude is abundant. It is also generally light and sweet, that is, low in density and sulfur, a favorable formula for importers and downstream operators, and easy to access. The raft of the Medusa was painted in somber monochromatic tones and has grown even darker as it has aged. This, the result of Jericho's experimental use of bituminous paint. Bitumen, a naturally occurring, non-drying, tarry substance used in paint mixtures to enrich the appearance of dark tones. Bitumen became very popular as a paint additive in the late 18th century and early 19th. However, because it does not dry, it eventually causes severe darkening and cracking of the paint. Shapeless future. We steal our way, far from press releases, to fish on rocks, to one side of the nothing power does not already oversee, practicing another mode of gasping. Intake stardust, infinitesimal drops of water, oil drops by turns turned out, turning sapphires, colors green turning blue, turning out. It's okay. We are always already dead. Always already. Still rising as hope's more resilient daughters, anger and courage, leap from ship to shore. Libya has two seas, the Mediterranean to the north and the Sahara to the south. Jody, wearing a red headscarf, is from Eritrea. Age 25, she is already a widow. She first went to Khartoum and was smuggled to Libya from there. She was caught while crossing the desert. Yes, it's dangerous. I know I can die. If I get a chance to live, okay, better. But if I die, that's okay. I cannot go anywhere else to change my life. The 4 months that we stayed there, do you know what death is like? Several times they said, we're leaving, but we didn't. Twice we reached the shore, but were turned back. Once we reached the boat, but then they said there's no more room. It looked like a fishing boat, but it was a strange time of day to go fishing. I will make you fishers of men, someone somewhere once said. The ships are pointed roughly towards a certain oil rig, not far from Lampedusa. The expectation is, if the boat is not spotted earlier, the employees of the oil rig will call the Italian or Maltese Coast Guard to pick it up. Many people would go on the boats even if they didn't have any rescue operations. And he only turned to smuggling because he could not find work as a lawyer. And we turn away quickly in the gallery, damaging some sky, and the great sea seen from below ripples ever outward.